I've spent most of my adult life underground. Not because I'm some thrill seeker. Not because I enjoy danger. Honestly, most caves are boring. Beautiful, sure, but boring. Hours of crawling through mud, squeezing through rock barely wider than your shoulders, following survey tape, checking maps, taking measurements. The people who have never been caving imagine giant chambers filled with mystery. Most of the time, it's just darkness, wet stone, and discomfort. That's probably why the things that happened to me stayed with me. Because when you spend enough time underground, you learn the difference between fear and imagination. You learn what cave sounds are normal, what echoes are normal, what shadows are normal. And when something isn't normal, you notice. I don't tell many people these stories. Most of the people who know me only know pieces of them. A strange incident here, a close call there, nothing connected, nothing that sounds impossible. But lately I've started wondering if all of those experiences were connected. Because when I look back now, there's a pattern I somehow missed while it was happening. And the first time I noticed, it was almost 12 years ago. Back then, I was 24. I worked part-time at an outdoor equipment store and spent every free weekend exploring cave systems across the state. Nothing extreme, mostly documented systems. Places with maps and known entrances. The cave where it started was called Hollow Creek Cavern. Not its real name. I don't use the real names anymore. You'll understand why later. The cave itself wasn't remarkable. Small entrance, limestone formation, a few miles of mapped passage, popular with local exploration groups. The kind of place that barely gets mentioned outside regional caving forums. I went with 3 other people, Ryan, Mitch, and Kelly. We had all explored together before. We trusted each other. That's important, because trust matters underground. If something goes wrong, the people with you become the only thing standing between inconvenience and death. The first few hours were normal. We followed the main route, took photos, checked some side passages. Nothing unusual. Then Ryan found a narrow opening partially hidden behind a collapsed section of rock. It wasn't on the survey map. That alone wasn't shocking. Small, undocumented passages get discovered all the time. The opening was tight, barely large enough for a person to squeeze through. Kelly wanted to leave it alone. Ryan wanted to explore. That argument lasted maybe 10 minutes. Eventually, curiosity won. Curiosity usually does. Ryan went first. I followed. Then Mitch. Kelly stayed behind and waited in the main chamber. The passage continued farther than expected. Not large, not impressive, just narrow and winding. Eventually, it opened into a chamber none of us had seen before. The room was maybe 30 feet across. Low ceiling, heavy mineral formations, still air, the kind of place that should have felt exciting. Instead, it felt wrong. Not dangerous. Wrong. Like walking into a room where someone had been standing moments before you arrived. Ryan noticed it too. I could tell. Nobody said anything for almost a minute. Then Mitch laughed nervously. Feels weird in here. That broke the silence. We all agreed. The chamber felt strange. We blamed bad airflow. Carbon dioxide pockets. Psychology. Anything except what we were actually feeling. Because none of those explanations fit. Then Ryan found the footprints. Not fresh footprints. Not muddy prints. Indentations. Pressed into a thin layer of mineral dust covering part of the floor. One set, bare feet, human-sized, leading toward the back wall. Not away, toward it. We followed them. The tracks ended abruptly. No return prints. No continuation. Just a blank limestone wall. Ryan shined his light across it. Nothing. Solid rock. No cracks. No hidden opening. Nothing. The prints simply stopped. That should have been enough reason to leave. Instead, we spent another 20 minutes examining the room, trying to explain it. Eventually, we gave up. We took photos, marked coordinates, and headed back. At least that was the plan. Halfway through the crawl passage, Ryan stopped moving. The tunnel was too narrow to see around him. "What is it?" I asked. No answer. A few seconds passed. Then Ryan spoke. His voice sounded distant. Not physically distant, emotionally distant, like he was listening to something else. "Did you hear that?" I hadn't. Neither had Mitch. Ryan remained motionless. Then he slowly backed toward us, faster than he had entered. His breathing had changed. When we finally reached the main chamber, Kelly immediately noticed something was wrong. Ryan wouldn't explain. Not at first. It took almost an hour before he finally admitted it. While crawling through the passage, he heard someone whisper his name, right behind him, close enough that he felt breath against his ear. The problem was simple. There was nobody behind him. I had been several feet back, and the tunnel was too tight for anyone else to be there. We laughed it off, or tried to. By the time we reached the surface, nobody wanted to discuss it anymore. The trip became another story, another weird experience. Nothing more. A month later, Ryan quit caving entirely. No explanation, no dramatic event. He just stopped, sold his gear, left every exploration group, refused invitations. Whenever Hollow Creek came up, he'd change the subject. I didn't think much of it at the time. People move on from hobbies. Life changes. It happens. 3 years later, Ryan disappeared. Not vanished mysteriously. Not officially missing. He simply left. Moved somewhere without telling anyone. Changed numbers. Deleted accounts. Gone. I didn't connect that disappearance to the cave until much later. Until after the second incident. The one that still bothers me more than anything else. Because the second cave proved the first one wasn't isolated. And because this time, I wasn't the only witness. The cave sat beneath an abandoned mining property nearly 200 miles away. Different region, different geology, different people. No connection whatsoever. At least that's what I believed when I arrived. I remember the weather. Cold rain, heavy clouds, wind pushing through dead trees around the entrance. 5 explorers, full survey equipment, everything documented, everything professional. The first anomaly appeared less than 30 minutes after entering. A marker tape, bright orange, tied around a rock formation. Fresh, recent. The problem was that none of us had placed it. And according to the access records, nobody had entered the cave in nearly 8 months. At first, we assumed another group had failed to log their visit. Simple explanation. Reasonable explanation. Then we found a second marker. And a third. Each deeper underground. Each newer than the last. Leading somewhere. Not marking the route out. Leading somewhere. And without realizing it, we started following them. One by one. Deeper into a section of cave that shouldn't have existed according to any map we possessed. Eventually, one of the group members checked our location. Then checked again. Then stopped walking. "What?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. He looked confused. Then pale. Then genuinely frightened. Finally, he said something that didn't make sense. "These coordinates are impossible." None of us understood what he meant until he showed us the map. According to every survey record available, the passage we were standing inside did not exist, and yet we were standing inside it, following a trail somebody had left specifically for us, toward something waiting farther underground, something that already seemed to know we were coming. Nobody wanted to say it out loud. But once we saw the discrepancy on the map, the atmosphere changed. Up until then, we've been treating the orange markers like an oddity, something mildly unsettling, the kind of thing explorers joke about afterward. Now it felt different. Now we had physical evidence that something wasn't adding up. I took the survey map myself, compared landmarks, checked passage angles, measured distances. Everything suggested we were exactly where our instruments said we were. The problem was that our instruments placed us inside solid rock, not near it, inside it. The documented cave system ended nearly 400 feet behind us. There should have been nothing here. No tunnel, no chamber, no route forward. Yet the passage stretched ahead into darkness. The orange markers continued deeper, and somehow that bothered me more than the impossible coordinates. Because somebody had left them. Someone had known this route existed. Someone had wanted people to follow it. The logical decision was turning around. Nobody suggested it. That's the thing about exploration. The same curiosity that drives discovery also gets people killed. We continued forward. The passage widened gradually. The rock texture changed. The limestone formations we'd been navigating gave way to darker stone. Older stone, at least that's how it felt. I'm not a geologist. I can't explain why the walls seemed different. Only that every instinct kept telling me we had crossed into a place that didn't belong to the rest of the cave. About 20 minutes later, we reached a chamber. It was enormous, far larger than anything documented in the system. Our lights barely reached the ceiling. The air felt unusually still, not stagnant, just motionless, as if airflow stopped at the entrance. The orange markers ended there. The last strip hung from a narrow stone column near the center. Beyond that point, there were no more signs. No arrows. No guidance. Nothing. Just darkness. One of the others, a guy named Trevor, walked toward the column. He crouched near the base, then froze. I remember the silence. Everyone noticed it simultaneously. The kind of silence where nobody asks questions because they already know something is wrong. "What is it?" I finally asked. Trevor didn't answer. He simply pointed. I moved closer. At first, I thought I was looking at footprints. Then I realized they weren't footprints. They were impressions. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, pressed into the mineral floor. Not shoe prints. Not animal tracks. Handprints. Human handprints. Every size imaginable. Adults. Children. Some small enough to belong to toddlers. Layered over one another. Crossing the entire chamber floor. As though an enormous crowd had crawled across it, toward the darkness beyond the stone column. Not away, toward it. The sight hit me harder than I expected, because caves preserve things. Not perfectly, but well enough. Those impressions looked old, very old, yet there was no reason for them to exist. No record of anyone discovering the chamber. No evidence of excavation. No explanation for how thousands of people could have entered an undocumented cave section without anyone knowing. Trevor took photographs. Several others did too. I remember checking my own camera afterward. None of the images survived. At the time, I blamed corrupted storage. Years later, I learned everyone else's photos disappeared too. Not deleted, not damaged, missing. The files simply weren't there. That realization came much later. Back then, we were still standing inside the chamber, trying to decide whether to continue. That's when we heard the knocking. 3 taps. Slow, distinct, coming from somewhere deeper in the darkness. Everyone heard it. That matters, because fear can distort memory. Groups can influence perception, but all 5 of us heard those knocks. 3 separate impacts. Stone against stone. Then silence. Nobody moved. Several seconds passed. Then the sound repeated. 3 knocks. Exactly the same rhythm. Exactly the same location. Trevor immediately assumed another exploration team was present. A reasonable assumption. Except there was one problem. The knocks came from beyond a section of cave nobody should have been able to access. There were no alternate entrances. No documented passages. Nothing. Still, we called out. No response. The 3rd series of knocks came almost instantly. This time closer. Not dramatically closer. Just enough. Just enough forever. Yon to notice. I remember feeling cold. Not physically cold. That strange internal chill that arrives when your brain identifies a threat before you consciously understand it. The others felt it too. Without discussing it, we started backing away. Slowly, keeping our lights pointed toward the darkness. The 4th series of knocks never came. Instead, something else happened. One of our headlamps went out. Then another. Not flickering. Not battery failure. Just darkness. 2 people suddenly standing blind. The remaining lights still worked. But the chamber seemed darker than before. Like our beams weren't reaching as far. Like the darkness itself had become thicker. That was enough. We left. No arguments. No debate. Just immediate agreement. We followed our route back toward the documented sections. At least we thought we did. About 15 minutes into the retreat, Trevor stopped. Again, the same way Ryan had stopped years earlier. Motionless. Listening. I was directly behind him. Trevor. Nothing. I repeated his name. He finally turned around. The expression on his face is difficult to describe. Not fear. Recognition. Like he'd just remembered something important. "What?" I asked. He stared at me for several seconds. Then asked a question I'll never forget. "How long have we been down here?" I checked my watch. 6 hours. Maybe a little more. Normal for a survey trip. Trevor looked genuinely confused. "No," he said. "How long?" The way he asked it made my stomach tighten. I don't know why. Maybe because he sounded completely sincere. Like 6 hours wasn't even close. We reached the surface shortly afterward. Rain was still falling. Vehicles remained where we'd parked them. Everything appeared normal. until we checked our phones. Every device showed the same date. 3 days later. Not 3 days elapsed underground. 3 calendar days later. At first we assumed software errors, dead batteries, time synchronization problems. Any explanation would have been acceptable. Except the messages waiting on our phones didn't support that theory. Family members had been trying to contact us. Employers had called. Friends were asking where we'd gone, because according to everyone above ground, we had been missing for 72 hours. The authorities had already begun preliminary search preparations. I wish I could tell you we solved it, that we discovered some mistake, some misunderstanding. We didn't. Our memories contained 6 hours. The world contained 3 days, and nobody could explain the gap. The group gradually fell apart after that. People stopped responding to messages, stopped attending trips, stopped discussing the cave. I tried to stay in contact, especially with Trevor, because something about his behavior bothered me. He wasn't traumatized. He wasn't frightened. He seemed distracted, like part of his attention remained somewhere else. Months passed. Then one night he called me. 3 in the morning. I almost didn't answer. I'm glad I did, because it was the last conversation I ever had with him. His voice sounded exhausted, not sleepy, worn down, like someone who hadn't rested in weeks. The first thing he asked was whether I remembered the handprints. I said yes. There was a long silence. Then he asked something stranger. Do you remember how many there were? I told him nobody could count that many impressions. There had been thousands. Another silence. Then he said something that made absolutely no sense. No. His voice dropped almost to a whisper. There weren't thousands. I waited. Trevor swallowed audibly, then continued. There were the same ones. I didn't understand. He explained. Ever since the trip, he'd been obsessing over his memory of the chamber, replaying details, studying sketches, trying to understand why something felt wrong. Finally, he realized it. The handprints weren't overlapping randomly. They repeated, the exact same prints, over and over. The same adult hands, the same child-sized hands, the same scars, the same shapes, copied hundreds of times across the floor, as though only a handful of people had crossed that chamber. Again, and again, and again, toward whatever had been knocking in the darkness. Then Trevor told me the part that kept me awake for weeks. The thing he remembered right before the line went dead. He said he finally knew why the passage wasn't on the map, because it wasn't there when earlier survey teams visited. According to him, the cave wasn't expanding. It was moving, and every few years it appeared somewhere new. I didn't believe Trevor. Not completely. I believed he was frightened. I believed something had happened to him. But caves don't move. Passages don't relocate themselves. Entire chambers don't drift through bedrock like living things. There had to be another explanation. Something geological. Something psychological. Something that existed inside the boundaries of reality. That was what I kept telling myself. Then Trevor vanished. Not dramatically. Not mysteriously. At least not at first. He simply stopped answering messages. The same pattern as Ryan. The same gradual withdrawal. The same disappearance from every social circle. By then enough time had passed that I noticed the similarity. 2 experienced explorers. 2 incidents. 2 people who slowly removed themselves from everyone they knew. I remember sitting in my apartment one night with maps spread across my kitchen table, trying to convince myself it was coincidence. The longer I stared at the maps, the worse the feeling became. Because a question had started bothering me. A simple one. If Trevor was right, if there really was some undocumented structure appearing in different cave systems, then why hadn't more people reported it? The answer arrived 6 months later, and it wasn't an answer I wanted. I attended a regional caving conference in Kentucky. Nothing unusual. Equipment vendors, safety seminars, survey presentations, the sort of event where hobbyists and professionals gather to exchange information. One speaker was presenting data about undocumented cave connections, mostly technical material. Boring, honestly, until one photograph appeared on the projection screen. A cave chamber, large, dark, poor image quality. The second I saw it, my stomach tightened. The handprints, the exact same floor, the exact same formations, the exact same stone column near the center. My first thought was simple. It had been rediscovered. My second thought was worse. The presenter claimed the chamber was found in New Mexico, over 1,000 miles from where we'd encountered it. I waited until the presentation ended, then approached him, asked questions carefully, tried not to sound insane. Eventually, he showed me the survey data. Coordinates, maps, photographs, dates, everything checked out. According to every record available, that chamber existed beneath a desert plateau nowhere near our previous location. I didn't tell him I'd seen it before. I just thanked him and left. That should have been the end. Instead, I spent the next 4 years chasing reports. Not officially, not obsessively, at least not at first. I simply paid attention. Every now and then a story would surface. An undocumented passage, strange missing time, voices, unexplained disappearances. Cavers are practical people. Most unusual stories get dismissed quickly, but a handful remain consistent. The details changed. The locations changed. Yet certain elements repeated. The handprints, the missing time, the knocking, and occasionally, the names. That part took me longest to understand, because people rarely discussed it openly. Most references appeared buried inside expedition notes or obscure forum posts. Someone hearing their name underground. Someone recognizing a voice. Someone stopping in a tunnel because they thought a friend had called to them. Always deep underground. Always in sections that shouldn't exist. Always shortly before something went wrong. I wish I could tell you I stopped investigating. I didn't. Partly because I wanted answers. Partly because I wanted proof that none of it was real. Instead, I found something much worse. A pattern. One that shouldn't have been possible. Every documented encounter shared another detail. The affected person almost always experienced a significant personal loss beforehand. A divorce, a death, isolation, depression, financial collapse. Something that left a hole in their life. At first, I dismissed that observation. Then I looked at my own history. Ryan had recently lost his father. Trevor's marriage had collapsed months before our expedition. And me? I had spent years pretending my younger sister's death didn't affect me. But it had. More than I admitted. She died when I was 19. Car accident. Drunk driver. Nothing supernatural. Nothing mysterious. Just tragedy. By the time I entered Hollow Creek years later, I was still carrying it. Maybe everyone carries something. Maybe that's the point. Maybe whatever waits underground looks for people already missing someone. The idea sounds ridiculous. I know that. But it became harder to dismiss after the Nevada incident. Because that's where everything stopped being theoretical. That's where I stopped hearing stories from other people and started experiencing it myself. The cave was located beneath an abandoned volcanic formation. Remote, difficult access, almost no visitors. I joined a 3-person survey team. Short trip, nothing ambitious, just documentation work. I nearly canceled. Weather reports looked bad. The drive was long. Work deadlines were piling up. I went anyway. The first day was uneventful. The second day changed everything. We discovered an opening hidden behind a partial collapse. A narrow slot descending into darkness. The kind of find explorers dream about. Nobody recognized it from previous surveys. Nobody had documentation. Nobody had records. That alone should sound familiar by now. At the time, it felt exciting. Fresh territory. New discovery. The descent took nearly 40 minutes. The deeper we traveled, the quieter everything became. No airflow. No dripping water. Nothing. Even our voices sounded strange. Muffled. As if the cave absorbed sound faster than normal. Around noon, we reached a chamber. Not the chamber. A different one. Smaller. Circular. Featureless. Except for a single object resting near the center. A flashlight. Old model. Corroded. Covered in mineral deposits. At first, nobody thought much about it. People lose equipment underground all the time. Then one of the others picked it up and read the name scratched into the side. Ryan. I remember the exact feeling. The way my stomach dropped. The sudden rush of heat in my chest. Because it wasn't a common name. It was Ryan's full name. The same Ryan who'd abandoned caving years earlier. The same Ryan who had vanished from everyone's lives. The flashlight looked old. Very old. As though it had been sitting underground for decades. Not years. Decades. The others asked if I knew him. I lied. I said no. I don't know why. Instinct, maybe. Fear. Something told me not to explain. Not yet. We continued deeper. That decision still bothers me, because every part of me wanted to leave. But curiosity won again. It always does. The passage beyond the chamber narrowed, then widened, then narrowed again. The route became increasingly difficult. Several times I considered turning around. Each time I convinced myself to keep moving. Then I heard her voice. Not a voice. Her voice. My sister's. Soft. Distant. Coming from somewhere ahead. I stopped instantly. The others continued several steps before noticing. I remember one of them asking if I was okay. I couldn't answer, because I was listening. The voice came again. Not loud. Barely above a whisper. Speaking my name. The exact way she used to say it. 20 years of memory collapsed into a single moment. Every rational thought disappeared. I knew it wasn't possible. I knew she was dead. I knew none of it made sense. And still, part of me wanted to follow it. Part of me wanted to hear it again. The worst thing about grief isn't sadness. It's hope. That tiny irrational hope that maybe you're wrong. Maybe somehow they're still there. Waiting. That was the feeling the cave used against me. Because the voice wasn't trying to frighten me. It was trying to comfort me. And for a few seconds, I almost followed it into the dark.